so see, Mujuba Kalini, Iwo, Idamole, Mujuba Oro, Mujuba Shupa, Mujuba Aye, Mujuba Ile, Mujuba Omi, Mujuba Inya, Mujuba Fefe, Mujuba Ligu Merinaye, Adelaru, Mujuba Boru, Mujuba Liwa, Mujuba Gusu, Mujuba Rita, Mujuba Gungu, Mujuba Wadi and Mission, Mujuba Lukoto, Mujuba Lucy, Iba Baba, Iba Ye, Iba Lugo, Siba Ju, Iba Jugoka. Iba Koda, Iba Sheda, Iba Bobo Egu Gilimi, Iba Bobo Egu Bobo Elia. At this time, I ask you to call out the names of the ancestors in your family. Call them out. Let's bring the saints in. Come on. Iba, 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 Iba. That's all y'all got? Iba. I keep calling on Chief Bay. I call on Osa Unko. I call on all of the ancestors who taught me, who trained me, who mentored me. Ashe, Tok, Ibanish. We use water because water is the staff of life upon which we exist. We cannot exist without water. Water is essential for our existence. And by us offering water, we're sharing water. We're sharing water. We're giving back to the universe what the universe gives us in order for us to survive. My 10 minutes starts now. Okay. So, I have a lot to say, and I only have 10 minutes, so it's not going to be a presentation. It's going to be anecdotes. As I said, I'm from this neighborhood. I grew up on Atlantic Avenue, on Prospect Place, on Carroll Street. I learned how to play in the park of the Children's Museum. I learned how to play in Prospect Park. I learned how to play on the streets, and you heard my resume. Culture is what I do. It's who I am. I have seen the world. I have been on every continent. I have been traveling for the last 50 years. And it is because of culture. And what do we mean by that? And why is that important? Preserving cultural practices. Let's think about this. We're talking about our community. We're talking about the importance of culture in our community. We have people who go to Lincoln Center. They dress up in gowns. They dress up in tuxedos, pearls and diamonds. And they go to listen to a concert of somebody who's been dead for 300 years. Mozart, Strauss, Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky. Chinese do the lion dance. Every culture on the planet has classical music. One of the first classical musics that I found out about riding the train, I met a man from Egypt, and he turned me on to Kulthum when I was about 20 years old. And I heard Egyptian classical music. And I heard violins playing in a way that I didn't hear here in this country listening to European classical music. If we're talking about the importance of culture and we're talking about liberation, the first thing that we have to do is honor culture, is honor heritage. A tree is not its roots, but without its roots, it could not exist. The roots is what nourishes it. The roots is what nourishes the tree. In order for the tree to be able to survive the wind and the rain and the sun, it's the roots that nourishes that tree. We can walk around Bed-Stuy and we can look at all of these brownstones. We say, oh, look at the brownstones. And if you're an interior decorator, you're going to decorate inside the building and you're going to change the floor plan and the hardwood floors. And these stuff is going to exist. So it's important that we recognize the importance of foundation, the importance of legacy. Langston Hughes, 1940, note on commercial theater. You've taken my blues and gone. You sing them on Broadway, you sing them in Hollywood Bowl, you mix them up with the symphonies, and you fix them so they don't sound like me. Yup, you've done taken my blues and gone. You always took my spirituals and gone. You put me in Macbeth and Carmen Jones and all kinds of swing mikados and in everything but what's about me. But someday somebody will stand up and talk about me and write about me, black and beautiful, and sing about me and put on plays about me. I reckon it'll be me, myself. Yes, it'll be me. That's Langston Hughes. 1940. Now I got an addendum. You've taken my jazz and gone, and my R&B, and my reggae, and my hip-hop, and my gospel, and my African drumming, and my African dancing, and my African spirituality, all while I just sit by and watch and complain until I reckon that it'll have to be me, myself. My point with this is that as an artist, I don't feel anybody should have to tell me how to express myself as an artist. I don't believe any artist should be dictated about how they should practice their art. But if art is created without a connection to the roots, without a connection to the foundation that nourishes it, so that it doesn't spin off into some nebulous, abstract, unrelated, self-indulgent expression, it is not serving the purpose of liberation. So as we go forward, it is essential that we understand what our roots are, what our heritage is. People of African descent talk about liberation, they talk about freedom, they talk about self-empowerment, we talk about self-sufficiency. But today, if people of African descent got all of those things that they listened, that they asked for, that they're demanding, that they're begging, as independent people, the banking system would be a European banking system. The educational system would be a European educational system. Jurisprudence would be a European jurisprudence. Because the efforts have not been made to understand what the heritage is. If I said to you, who is the richest man in history, does anybody know? Anybody know? Okay, I'm going to save you some time. If you Googled it, it would be Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, the emperor of the Mali Empire. Okay? Richest man in history. But let's think about that. Because the richest man in history, who's the emperor of the Mali Empire, he had to have a banker. He had to have an administrator. He had to have people who were mining it, who were smelting it, who were carrying it, who were guarding it. So there was a whole civilization. Now, in case you haven't guessed, I am a Pan-Africanist. I am a Pan-Africanist because Pan-Africanism is the only strategy that has not been wholeheartedly embraced. Get an education. It's not working, is it? Get the vote. It's not working, is it? Get a job and make some money. It's not working, is it? But imagine if all of those people in the islands where all of the cruise ships were going owned that. Imagine if the ships were owned, like Marcus Garvey said, own the ship. Imagine what it would look like internationally if people of African descent were unified and looking at each other, recognizing each other,
respecting each other, loving each other, working together to make a difference for those very things that we talk about. I'm not conceited, I'm convinced. And I'm living it. I have lived it. I'm an African drummer. I have a house in Bed-Stuy. I've raised 3 children. I have grandchildren. All of my children have advanced degrees, and that's a whole nother conversation. But what do we measure success by? By whose definition? What do we measure beauty by? By whose definition? And if we're going to have the conversations that were being had this weekend, then those things have to be really critically talked about. One of my teachers used to say it's easy to cook with the mouth. We can talk about, we can have conferences, we can have panel discussions, we can do all, but if the due diligence is not engaged in, the people who oppress people of African descent have invested time, energy, and resources to oppress. They're not going to give it up. If time, energy, and resources of equal measure are not invested by the people who seek liberation, do you really think anything is going to change? Do you really think anything is going to change? And if you do, you're kidding yourself because you're not kidding me. I had the opportunity to sit with Mr. Belafonte, I was with him for 15 years. Miriam Makeba, I was in South Africa during apartheid. I was in Cuba when Fidel was in power. I can go on and on. I'm saying all that to say, not to big myself up, but to say that I have seen it because I have lived it. And I've lived it because I'm an artist that grew up in Bed-Stuy playing African drums. The one instrument that was outlawed in 1740. So when I get on the stage with a piano, that's a European instrument, and a saxophone is a European instrument, and a bass is a European instrument, and a trumpet that's a European instrument, I'm playing the one African instrument, which happened to be outlawed. And had the opportunity to function in capacity over this time. Self-knowledge is essential. Self-knowledge is essential. As an artist, art is literacy. And I'm going to leave you with this. Art is literacy. We have been conditioned to believe that literacy is the word on the page. It is not. If you can walk through the forest and read the plants and know which plant is going to nourish you, and which plant is going to heal you, and which plant is going to soothe you, that is literacy. If you can read the sky, you know when the weather is going to change. That is literacy. If you know what the dance means, that is literacy. If you know what the rhythm is, that's literacy. You don't sit on drums and just bang drums. No. And if you think somebody that is a dynamic drummer, that's a master drummer just because they're a master drummer, you're kidding yourself. So, self-knowledge, I implore that you take the time to invest the time, the energy, and the resources to achieve the goal, and invest to achieve the goal of this conference. Was designed. I thank you.
I realized that we did not tell you who we were and why we were standing up here. I'm Lisa Saldana. I'm the Senior Manager of Artists and Community Development at the Laundromat Project.
And I'm Trisha Barton, Senior Manager of Arts and Pedagogy at the Laundromat Project.
And we are here to turn it over to our Executive Director, Aisha Williams, who will ground us in the overall conversations we've been having around artists as neighbors, living liberation. Aisha. And thank you, Chief Babanil.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for trudging through the torrential downpours, which the sun has come out and shined. So that's the blessing on us for being here today. Thank you, Chief Babanil Clark, for that grounding and rooting us and inviting in our ancestors to join us this evening as we continue the conversation around artists as neighbors living liberation. So I'll give a little grounding and a little background of what we've been doing over the past month. So again, my name is Aisha Williams. I'm Executive Director at the Laundromat Project. And thank you for joining us tonight, or this evening, it's not night yet. This evening's conversation is Kilombo Chronicles, Celebrating Resilience and Collective Liberation. And again, as we've shared, this brunch program is the culmination of our 3-part Artists as Neighbors Living Liberation series. Over the past month, through a series of conversations, we have explored how artists as neighbors and everyday people are potent catalysts helping to drive positive change in our communities. At the LP, we are not constricted to any clinical definition or popular definition of who or what an artist is. We believe in the ability of any and everyone to leverage the innate power of creative expression and use it for the good and the betterment of our communities. Through creative encounters, artists engage with their neighbors, they forge connections, and they foster dialogue. They bring art to the forefront of everyday life, transforming everyday spaces and everyday interactions into canvases for storytelling, for healing, for archiving, for remembrance, and more. It's through these experiences that we understand how art has the power to inspire, to challenge, and provoke thought, making it a powerful tool for promoting liberation. And what exactly is liberation? Something that we're constantly asking ourselves and have been asked. The title of this program itself is emblematic of liberation. In their own quest for freedom, enslaved Africans in Brazil escaped and established settlements, self-sustaining communities that preserve their customs, their culture, and their memories. These would be known as quilombos, a symbol of dignity, freedom, resistance, and transcendence. The very location where we're here today, because we could have held this conversation anywhere around the city. The location where we're here today and holding this program, Restoration Plaza, is also symbolic of liberation. In the 1960s, faced with disinvestment, a vision of liberation took hold, establishing the country's first community development corporation, where this predominantly Black neighborhood of Bed-Stuy would thrive by building programs intended to combat economic inequality and bridge the wealth gap. The LP builds on this legacy, recognizing that true liberation exists beyond any physical or economic empowerment. It also encompasses the power of artistic expression and cultural preservation. As an arts organization that supports artists as neighbors, we gave ourselves an assignment to explore and understand the ways that public art has the potential to contribute to issues of concerns related to gentrification, displacement, and erasure, but also can be a resource to counter this disruption and serve as an asset for cultural preservation. In our 2 opening conversations, Evolutions in Public Art and Displacement, and Remembering and Reclaiming Our Neighborhoods, panelists and participants reflected on potential conditions for living out liberation. These included nurturing shared spaces for dialogue and exchanging ideas, like the one we're in this afternoon, investing in, relying on, and affirming the value of our own resources for sustainable development, and protecting and preserving culture by resourcing the next generation with knowledge, information, and tools to continue this journey. We do recognize that art alone cannot achieve liberation. However, it plays a crucial role in inspiring, in mobilizing, and in leveraging the power of individuals and communities to challenge oppressive systems and to foster dialogue. By using art as a tool for liberation, we have the power to counter narratives that are not in our own making. We have the power to transform our neighborhoods and our communities into spaces that truly reflect and represent us, our needs, our dreams, our hopes, our visions, our futures. Using art as a tool for liberation, we can imagine and build a world we have never seen. Our ancestor and visionary writer and curator Bell Hooks said, "Liberation leads us beyond resistance to transformation. This is the world that art can help us build." I want to thank the programs team, Trisha, Issa, Catherine, Alex, Shan, for getting us here this evening. Any kind of natural event that could happen to stop us from having this conversation has. Wildfires, we went online, still had the conversation. Torrential downpours, we just brought it inside. So thank you to you all for creating the space for these conversations to happen. I also want to do my thanks to our community partners, Bedside Restoration Corporation, Brooklyn Community Board 3, Somewhere Good, and Tranquility Farms, our original spaces and locations for our earlier conversations this month. I also want to thank our funders, Humanities New York, the Mellon Foundation, the Muriel Palia Foundation, and the Terra Foundation of American Art for making this program possible. And most importantly, thank you to each of you for the contributions that you'll make today towards helping us better understand how we live out liberation. And so before I turn it over to Catherine and Dr. Fatou Giddens, I'm going to do a land acknowledgement. So our land acknowledgement, as we are situated in the Bedside neighborhood of Central Brooklyn, the Laundromat Project respectfully acknowledges that we are on the occupied and unceded land of the Canarsie, who are part of the Munsee Lenape. We recognize them as the original stewards of this land and pay respects to their elders past, present, and future. Thank you all. I will turn it over to Issa and Trisha.
I promise we're gonna sit down soon, y'all. And we're getting to our main event. So we're gonna start with just introducing you to our keynote conversation today. And we'll start with our moderator.
Yes, so for our moderator, Catherine Mbali Green Johnson is a cultural leader with over 20 years of experience working in arts administration and community advocacy. She is an innovative practitioner deeply rooted in curating programming that empowers and inspires communities of color to advocate for positive, sustainable transformation co-created on their terms. Prior to joining the LP, Green founded Arts East New York, where she forwarded its mission by masterfully combining the art of community engagement and artistic expression towards the arc of social change. Catherine believes in utilizing the power of imagination, storytelling, and ancestral research to create radical sustainability plans and steward resources for an integrative approach to societal change, all of which makes her a powerful moderator for our keynote conversationalist, Dr. Angela Fatou Giddens.
And Dr. Giddens is a proud South Carolina Dulles Sea Islands descendant. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, Dr. Giddens formerly served as the Executive Artistic Director of Ifetayo Cultural Arts Academy, a nationally acclaimed Brooklyn-based institution that teaches youth to become agents of social justice in the performing and visual arts. Fatou holds a PhD and MPhil in performance studies with a focus on dance history and sociolinguistics from New York University. She is fluent in 6 languages, and is also a graduate of Oberlin College and Yale University. Dr. Giddens has won awards for her writing and research on the Senegambia region, South Africa, France, and Mexico. So we're excited to have her bring a global perspective to the concept of liberation. In addition to being a dancer, singer, and scholar, she is currently the artistic director at Girl Be Heard. Dr. Giddens resides with her husband and 2 sons right here in Bed-Stuy. Thank you for being with us today.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So happy to see these beautiful faces. So happy to be in the presence of you all. I'm going to do something really quickly. Give me 1 second. While I do that, can you take a moment to just introduce yourself and say what's on your heart right now? But I just need to make a quick adjustment. Yeah, absolutely. Greetings, everyone. Greetings. I love y'all. ¿Cómo están? ¿Cómo están? Bien. ¿Cómo se va? Nugget Beth? And I would read you in the ESL, but we have a wonderful interpreter right here. So just a little bit in addition, thank you so much for the introduction, which was so warm. Yes, we are out. The sun is trying to peek out, and despite the monsoons, right? The Brooklyn and New York downstate monsoons, we are here, right? And we, I think, are ready to continue, as we can continue to engage, thanks to Baba. Neil, I wanted to acknowledge what he has brought in this space because he is a living legend. Let's give him another round of applause. And I just a little more about myself. I definitely want to say first and foremost that I am, in fact, my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I say that because being a daughter of the South, right, along with my sister right here, speaking about being daughters of the South, what does that mean? That means that I acknowledge that I am the daughter of Sadie Brown, James Burns Brown. I am the granddaughter of Doc Boucher, Elizabeth Myers Boucher, Jerry Brown Sr., Sarah Jane Brown. I am the daughter-in-law of Suhelo Sekou Owusu and Nana Makini. And I say I acknowledge them because to be here, I would be nowhere without them and without their struggle and without their progress, which was to raise their children and their children's children. And I am very thankful and humbled by that so that I can sit in this seat first, giving thanks for all that they have done to make it possible for me, the granddaughter of a sharecropper. Ashe.
Ashe. Thank you for that. That's why I had to make that adjustment. I wanted to get them closer. So we thank you all for sharing the names of your ancestral lines and welcoming them into the space to be a part of the conversation. So we want them to be really a part of this conversation. So I just wanted to bring the plant over. And so thank you so much for Baba to bring them into the space and help us welcome them because they are very much a part of this important conversation. This conversation is Fatu and I. However, thank you for acknowledging your line. I always acknowledge and introduce myself also by introducing my maternal line. So I am Catherine Mbali Green Johnson, who's the daughter of Sarah, who's the daughter of Annie, who's the daughter of Josephine, and who's the daughter of Lucinda. All these women on my maternal line hail from Southport, North Carolina, and they bring the wisdom, they bring the medicine that make me who I am today. And so we connected in many different paths and ways, family, community, etc. And so we've traveled together 2 years ago. Yes. 2 years ago, we created and collaborated on a journey bringing families to Senegal and the Gambia for an experience there, 10 days.
Yes,
wow.
During COVID, right?
During COVID, we brought families together and traveled there, and it was an incredible experience, one which we will continue to do. Absolutely. And we also have partnered together in community with the Vitayo and Artiste New York, and then our families also, my husband, Kojo, who's not here today, our children who are of the same age and all the things. So, and then of course, more importantly, community. We love community, we love Bed-Stuy, we love all of the neighborhoods that we place our feet because they belong to us. Our ancestors have traveled all over. Baba brought in the spirit of Mansa Musa and his brother. If you're not familiar with his brother, who's Uh, his brother was a traveler, was one of the first explorers. So we talk about Christopher Columbus. However, his brother was actually one of the first explorers, bringing teams across the waters to communicate with the indigenous folks here in America, in South America as well. So yes. So in many different ways we intertwine. So we were having a discussion as we were building out, my team was building out this program. We've been on the theme of liberation, and I called Fatu. Like, Fatu, I need to think through something. Like, we're having this convening, and I've been thinking about what to call it. Like, what do we, she's a linguistic, and she's brilliant, and it's my sister. So we had a beautiful conversation between her, myself, and her husband, Mesura, who brought in this concept that I thought was just amazing to introduce and give some grounding and history to our communities. And so, Fatuk, if you can tell us a little bit more about Kilombo and what that means for yourself, your work, and for the community of Bedside and beyond.
Okay, absolutely. So first, as a language lover, as an analyst of languages, and as a language educator, I would like to just have everybody repeat that term. Say Kilombo.
Kilombo.
Yes. Kilombo has a number of definitions, and there's a little history behind that. But before even touching on that, I love the theme that you have embraced in terms of living liberation, right? And even starting with that term of liberation, if we think about the meaning of liberation in and of itself, and I have my little cheat sheet because there's so much to say that there are certain things that I definitely wanted to touch on today specifically. And so if we think about the literal definition of liberation, we think about freedom from oppression, right? Freedom from oppression, or the act of emancipation, right? And if we think about liberation also being associated, which we should keep in mind, it is associated with a physical space, right? So yes, we can be mentally free, right? We can feel liberated mentally, spiritually, of course, absolutely. But there is a physical space that is associated also oftentimes, and that's also important with the term liberation. Because in order to live out one's desired dream or goals as a community, right, as a group of people, as a culture, you have to have a space to do that. And it not just be a mental space when you come together. It's not just when you come together in prayer. It is a physical manifestation of an acknowledgement of land and territory that is associated with where that particular group of people lives, right? And where they decide to practice their own beliefs. And so even building on liberation, if we think about the term Kilombo, Kilombo is actually a language that is out of one of the languages from the Central African region in the former Congo Empire of Central Africa. And so you have Kilombo with a K, which is really the Kimbundu language term. And then you see often Kilombo with a QU. That is reflective of Portuguese, right? The Portuguese or the former colonizers' language, right? Or in Spanish, you will see it also oftentimes with a QU. But the K, it's still the same word, Kilombo, right? And understanding what that term is, and the reason I started in the Central Africa with the language of the people is because in diaspora, as a result of the slave trade, the movement, the forced migration of peoples of African descent to different regions of the world, they carried with them and held on and retained, of course, certain words and meanings and understandings. So this term Kilombo that resurfaced in Brazil, as an example, is where in parts of not just Brazil, but throughout the Americas, throughout the Western Hemisphere, you have territory that served as havens for escaped, formerly enslaved Africans. Africans that said no more. Africans that figured out a way to get out with the help of each other, those who were still there, and those who had found ways to escape. Of course, in forced migration, you're in a place that is not your home field, right? So we're talking about people who were forced to be somewhere and to get used to a brand new environment under incredibly harsh conditions, as we know, right? And again, us being here is simple, is an acknowledgement that we have to make, right? Not only for our African ancestors, but even the land acknowledgement that was given, right? Because we were not the first people here, right? Europeans were not the first people here, right? We know that we have the Lenape people who were here and who were forcibly removed as well from this territory, this specific land on which we sit right now. So if we think about people who were now escaping, saying no more to the conditions of their immediate slavery or enslavement systems, in Brazil specifically, they escaped and found their way to remote areas where it was very difficult for colonizers to access those places, those spaces. So now we're talking about enslaved folks who had their own system of communicating and saying, hey, there's a way we can get away from where we are right now, and we can go somewhere. We can go to the mountains. We can go to the forest. We can go to the jungles, right? And we can find a way to live there and do what we need to do and become at one with the immediate conditions, right? The environment of the jungle, of the mountains. So Kilombo became a term used for maroon, what we say in English, maroon, what we say in French, marron, what we say in Spanish is cimarron, right? The cimarrones societies to be able to burgeon and thrive and do what they need to do in their own liberation outside of an immediate space where they were able to escape from and where colonizers dared not try to go and find and take and capture and bring back Africans who had found ways to live. So Kilombo is really those particular areas. And we see them throughout. Quilombos exist in, there's a term, like I said, you know, you have like the same way you would say Maroon society, Kilombo happens to be a Maroon society in Brazil. But we also have Maroon societies or los cimarrones in different Spanish-speaking countries as well. We have les marrons in different French-speaking former colonies. And so it's really, really powerful.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation. I think that speaks to Bed-Stuy so significantly, and how we have built community here, sort of separate and apart to do planning and, you know, just having the space to think and be liberated in our own existence here in the community. Can you speak to the sort of connections and how we can deepen and understand that even a little bit better? And before we even go to that, before you answer that question, I also wanted to, I heard someone as they were coming in today asking around the pattern that we selected for liberation for the series. And so the pattern is comes from a Kuba cloth. If anyone's familiar with Kuba cloth, it's like a raffia. You've seen it. It's this Central African pattern that you'll see also from the Congo. And it's a symbol of liberation. It's a symbol of patterns and paths and pathways in order to find your own freedom, right? And so I thought it was so significant to bring in that pattern into our branding for this event today. So just more discoveries, more ways for us to gain connection, but it is about connection. It is about creating paths for ourselves to form liberatory thought. And so the question back to you, Fatou, what does that mean for a community like Bedside, communities across this country and internationally, to create pathways for folks to find spaces to think in liberatory ways?
Yes, it is about reclamation, right? It is about also holding on, and just like Baba Neil said, acknowledging and embracing and being self-empowered, but also holding up the pride of one's own heritage. Because, you know, if we don't have and continue to work with and build on what we have established and what we have created, someone else will be happy to do it, right? And we know that many times the cultural appropriation has happened, right? We, as art makers, and that's a conversation that I'm sure we'll get to as well more specifically, but in creating and doing art making is one example, right, of how to make it known that we can hold up and be proud of who we are as a people and to tell our stories. So there are two things that I definitely wanted to make sure that we understand is that, you know, storytelling and controlling our own narrative, right, is so incredibly important. Instead of having someone else eventually write a book about it or do a film, make a movie about it, we want to be able to do this and talk and hold up our own legacies and have our own, create our own opportunities to tell stories, right? So not only are we telling our own stories, right? Not only do we use and work with our professional storytellers who can, in fact, make sure that our story is accurate because it is our own voice, right? We also want to amplify it. Right? We want to make sure that there are ways, there are places that our stories can be told. And that's as art makers using different platforms to do just that. But even if we, you know, how many people let me just ask, how many people in the audience are art makers? You consider yourselves a creative head, right? Excellent. And that can come in so many forms, right? Even if you are not an art maker, doesn't matter, because at the community level, there's so much you can do in terms of the activism. I call myself an artivist, right? Meaning that not only am I an art maker, but I also am an activist, and I believe in putting the work that we do into action, right? So you can be an activist being as an active community member, as an active neighborhood supporter, right? You support what is happening around you. So as an example here in Bed-Stuy, we have so many different ways. There are, even if it's a way of looking at the block association, looking at your development corporations, such as Restoration, looking at your nonprofit organizations, such as Laundromat Project, going to and understanding that each borough has an arts council, right, and accessing funding and supporting what is happening. That's on the artistic level, but as an active community member, you can also know what's going on your community board. You can also know what's happening and know who the representative is in your neighborhood at the precinct. Because when meetings happen at those levels, it's oftentimes, as these neighborhoods, our neighborhoods get more and more gentrified, the new community members come in and they're going to those meetings. And they're making sure they know everything that's happening so that when they want to put in their 2 cents and say, this is what we think needs to happen, we sometimes we're unaware. Why is this change taking place? Because if we weren't at the meetings, or if we had a representative that came back and spoke about it, we would know. So these are ways that we can be active and at the local level. And like I said, the arts, we can talk about that as we continue in this conversation. But there are many, many ways we can do this.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's so important. One of our signature programs at the LP is Create Change. And so, you know, supporting artists to become change makers in their very own neighborhood. So whether they're here in Bedside or the Bronx, wherever, that they are a part of not just the art making process, but what does it mean to be a cultural historian, you know, a story keeper, holding stories, and also advocating for what's needed. And so those are some of the tools that we provide at the LP. And there are many organizations that do that work as well, but it's very, very important for us to, yes, be creative and be expressive, but also be able to flip some tables, right? Yes. To be revolutionary in our thought, to recreate and design our pathways for not only ourselves, but our next generation. And when I think about, I'm looking at you and I could see Sundiata's face, I'm looking at Nasara and I see Emilio, their sons, and thinking about that next generation and how powerful these young men are, and in our children, you know, that our nephews and nieces that we're growing together. What does it mean for us to have these conversations? We're here, and I think all of us have been are present and active, but what does it mean for us to plant seeds for the next generation, and how can we do this and have these conversations around liberation so that they are thinking, you know, outside of the box, because they have some wild, incredible ideas that I get really excited about. Your work with Girl Be Heard, just going to see their performance was absolutely powerful to see 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds like thinking in revolutionary ways. And so I just want to hear a little bit about how we can move this conversation forward to our next generation as well, so that they can make these shifts and join the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, first, as knowing that many times as we see around us, we have young people who just seem to be in another world, right? They seem to be in a different sort of bubble, right? I wish there, for example, were younger people here in terms of this age group that you just mentioned, right? The teen groups, meaning 13 to 21. Right, having that particular age group. I see maybe there are some folks who fit in that category. Are you all in that age category? Yes, all right, yeah. We're gonna give a shout out and clap, yes, for this particular representation of this age group. So incredibly important. Why? Because if we think of ourselves as art makers, as change makers with our art, we have to absolutely teach that and make sure that people who are within this age category feel and understand and think the same. In other words, by seeing and feeling their own sense of empowerment. And the only way we can do that is to give them, provide platforms to let them know we hear you. We hear you. Now that you have a platform, what do you have to say? What do you want to tell us? Right? And the platform can be a theater platform, it can be dance, it can be using the front steps on a project such as Stoops, Bed-Stuy, where you give people an opportunity to use the physical space to be art makers. And whatever the form of the art is, you can help young people think that, okay, I am going to speak up, and I do think that there's a place where I can say something and someone's going to listen to me, and they're going to hear me. The reason that the Bronx was so powerful, what I love about the hip, hey, shout out for the Bronx, BX, yes. But the reason that I absolutely love the story of the Bronx being the seat and the root of hip hop, right, is that in telling the story, you have young people, right, in the same age range that decided, you know what, enough already. Things are happening in this community. Our world looks like a bomb shelter. It looks like, you know, someone dropped the bomb literally on our communities. Folks, white flight was happening. Folks were leaving, and there were poor conditions that our people had to live under, right? So here we are in this space, and it was the young people that were very innovative and said, okay, we're going to tell our story. What's our platform? Right now, our platform is going to be a piece of linoleum. We're going to put something down on the ground, and we're going to use dance to show that we can break through with breakdancing. We can break through these immediate conditions, right? And we're going to take the electricity from the streets, and we are going to amplify what we're doing. Not just play the music low enough for the people who are standing right here to hear it, but we're going to amplify it, and we're going to turn this thing into a neighborhood situation where people are coming together and gathering, and you have a cipher, a space where people feel safe and expressive coming in and dancing and using language as they rapped and created a form that literally changed the world. But not only did they use this particular space to breakdance and to where you had the MC, the mistress or the master of ceremony, coming and speaking and using their words and their artistry with how they created words and threw rhymes together in this very ingenious way, right? With a message. They decided, you know what? The visual artists, we are going to take some colors and we are going to create, we're going to put our message, and not just our message, our name is important. And my name is going to be a tag. And people are going to recognize and know that I exist. And not only am I going to do that on a wall, a brick wall, in my community, I'm going to actually put it on the walls of a subway train, a subway car. And now, although you don't know what's going on up here in the BX and what conditions we're living under, you're going to see the beauty that I create on the side of this car, and it's going to go all the way from the Bronx to Coney Islands to Queens. It's going to cross into other boroughs. That's brilliance, right? That created, that art form was a form of not only telling one story, but amplifying it, making sure that the world could see it, right? Yes, let's give, because that's the kind of brilliancy that we as people of the diaspora have learned to tap into our brilliance. And in Brooklyn, we have murals and we have ways that we can amplify that the words, the colors are actually seen throughout. And now what do we have? Beautification, art mural projects, right? That beautify communities all over the country as well as the world now because of what first happened in the Bronx. That's right. That was the first literal example of that, right? And so I just say that listening, providing platforms for our young people and giving them an opportunity to speak up and know that they are heard and we see them, we are listening, and we're giving them an opportunity to create their art forms, I think is incredibly important.
Thank you for that. It just brought me all the way back tell my age. That also brings us full circle to what Baba was talking about, right? That brings us to memory and actually creating an infrastructure and just a platform for them to, our children, to know that things have been created before, right? That they don't have to start from scratch. That whole generation of, he talked about our own self-liberation, right? And that was a form of self-liberation and graffiti and tagging and, you know, standing up and giving ourselves voice, right? And then also just the commodification of our culture, making sure that we understand that this was not something to be, it was not originally something to be packaged and replicated, like it was really something that came from spirit, from our roots. and those roots should be nourishing us. And so how do we continue to amplify and tell the history of our people, of the Gullah Geechee Nation, of the Congo, like knowing that this pattern was not random, making sure that we continue to tell stories so that we all know we do have a pathway forward and we're not always creating something new. I think that that's a very important, absolutely important. So if you could tell us a little bit more about how you found your way to this work and what your pathway was, and then we talked about your ancestral line, but how did you really find your way to this artistic arts administration and dance and being a creative and blending all of that together, and what does that mean for your own liberation?
Very interesting, because I was born and raised in a musical family. So I'm from a family and generation, actually, of music makers. And having and using music as my medium expression in my household was something that wasn't even a question, right? It was just, it came with the territory. So yes, my sons, they were going to be put in, they definitely had to learn and take some form of a music class, right? So both of them are also percussionists and have studied under Baba Neal, and have studied under, as you know, your husband, Baba Kojo, who was one of their first teachers, music teachers, in a formal way, right? But because from birth, they were born into music. And so having music be a very important medium was one thing, and then also loving and embracing and becoming a dancer, moving to New York and dancing with forces of nature, and having Baba Abdel Salam and Mama Diane Harvey Salam be my dance parents, also studying under Maribas Wiles, who also, you know, was an amazing, amazing dance teacher and educator and performer herself. Putting together the different forms of art was one thing that became a passion of my own in going on the stage. However, also going into learning that it takes money, right? It takes funding to do work. I did not want to be a starving artist, never wanted to be from day one, and understood that, you know, there are ways that you can use your art form as well as be innovative in how you collect salary as you continue to think about your career as an art maker, right? So as I continued in school, always being an art maker. While I'm studying languages and learning about the power of language and language being culture and traveling and seeing this, wherever I was looking at, okay, well, what's the expressive way that people in this particular nation are using language and art? And then eventually working at the Brooklyn Arts Council in New York, as I was here, seeing, okay, here's the politics. Here's what happens now when it comes to the funding. Someone sits at a table and makes these decisions, right? Someone decides who gets what pot of money for artists in order to do their projects. And that happens throughout New York City, throughout the country, nationally, internationally, but nationally, and then filtering it to state levels, and then by borough in New York City, and then downstate New York, right? So I learned a lot in doing that, and saw how the activism and the advocacy for arts was so incredibly important. And being able to have artists come into the Arts Council for access to those funds and being able to give technical assistance, and then seeing, hey, you know what? You can be powerful in what your expression is, as well as be creative at the same time. So for me, I was always using my right brain, right side, left side, and seeing that there is a way that we can continue. We can definitely do that, and you don't have to always just do one or the other, but the funding is key. The advocacy is key, and that's where I was able to take that in, while the art of archiving and remembering was also important.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And that also brings back a thought around collective liberation. Because some of us are able to do, I'm an arts administrator and artist and all the things, but when we work collectively in community, we don't have to be. We can lean into one of our genius. We may have multiple geniuses, and there's nothing wrong with that, but working together collectively for liberation and funding and sourcing and all the things is extremely important to begin to plan. As we end this conversation, we're going to actually ask you to start seeding some thought around collective liberation. But I do want to bring it, again, back full circle back to what Baba said. When he talks about the actual drum, the African drum being banned, right, in the Deep South. I believe New Orleans was the first place that bans the drum from being played. So because they wanted us to not, right, hear that rhythm, they thought about plans of our liberation and escape and, all the things, because the drum is the way we speak to one another, is the way we talk. And so not remembering or bringing that back to memory for all of us, what can be taken away from us or controlled, right, funding and things like that. So it's a disconnect from our own artistic practices, the root of our gifts. And so I want to just make that connection, to make sure that we all collectively work when we see funding being halted in neighborhoods, or or spaces that are being closed down, or spaces that are being halted and stopped from being built. It is a part of a disconnect, because the root of our creativity is our own liberation, it is our freedom, it is our connection that has us in this room and can build new societies and new realities, and that is what capitalism does not want to happen, yes? These are what these folks who are planning our neighborhoods do not want to see happen. They don't want us to be in this room so that we can continue to preserve and collectively talk about buying up blocks and making sure that people stick and stay. Not gouging rents, not flipping, but we're making sure that people stick and stay in neighborhoods and can live and thrive for their families. And so I just want us to be really present to what that means to our neighborhood when we don't have the access to funding, and what we can do collectively to make sure that we do. One of the programs that we do at the LP in our Liberation Series, one of the first events that we did was a brunch. Another brunch. I think clearly we love brunch. We did a brunch at Greedy Vegan, and instead of raising money just for the LP, we raised money for the United Order of Tents, right? Another Black organization here, a legacy organization that started in the South, the Deep South, which I didn't even know. My mama and my whole maternal line, they were all members of the United Order of Tents that I found out that day. We got to talk about that. Yeah, my mother was there. She's like, girl, we all was members. I'm like, oh, okay. How powerful would that have been for me to know as a youngin' and to this day? But yeah, so we want to make sure that we are collectively raising funds, we are collectively sharing resources, we are collectively planning. And what does that mean in your work, and how have you, you've started so many coalitions, Fatu, and let's talk a little bit about even the East Brooklyn, Central Brooklyn Arts Coalition, and what that, Brooklyn Arts, and how that brings to that looping back in the concept of Kilombo, and how that all, manifests for the sustainability of our neighborhoods.
Right, it's that activism, right? It's how do you turn the vision into an act. Bed-Stuy, as an example, has so many artists that are a span, just like, you're mentioning culinary arts in terms of Letitia and Greedy Vegan, and you have so many other examples of restaurants that are Black-owned, but also we have visual artists, we have musicians, including a ton of jazz musicians. We have our our traditional African drummers, such as Baba himself, which, you know, it's a blessing that he, as a living legacy and living legend, is able to share after doing world tours and come back and talk about what it is to still be proud to be a representative of Bed-Stuy, right? I think it's important to make sure that people see that not only at the artistic level is it important to continue to create, but to make sure that you galvanize with other art makers in the community. Because you can be a creative head and be in your own zone or your own bubble or a silo even, right? But if no one else, if you don't know what's happening right around you, or if you don't connect with other art makers around you, then sometimes you wouldn't be necessarily as empowered as you would be if you work with other artists as well. So I think the more art makers that come together inside of the community, the more empowered we can become as a community, and the more you can also make community members see that they can appreciate and use the art that is being created at the local level and support that art without feeling like they have to go into Manhattan, or without feeling like you have to go across town, or just like Baba said, you know, learning about composers that have been dead and gone for hundreds of years, right? You can look at what is right here, right in front of us. So I would encourage the art makers in the room to work with people who don't consider themselves art makers, and then galvanize, have conversations, network, really take advantage. I think Laundromat Project, what I love about Laundromat Project that I think is also brilliant is the concept of making information accessible to people at the local level by way of the concept of a laundromat. Where do people go to do their laundry, to take care of their needs on a regular basis? And where might we strike up conversations if people are going to the laundromat? Well, how can that happen, right? It's a very basic concept, but it's a way that, again, galvanizing can happen. So I just would encourage people to, no matter what you do here, in this room, in this space, challenge yourselves to get, if you don't know 5 people in this room, have a conversation with 5 people that you don't know. Find out what they do. Tell them what you do. And that way you can see, and you'd be surprised, right? Sometimes we say 6 degrees of separation, right? That's how we connected, understanding and having so many conversations and being of like minds. You would be surprised how many people in the room feel the same way. And then each one teach one. You go beyond this room. People who probably would have come today had it not been, you know, with the torrential rains, right? But spread the word and continue to go in your community, within your community, so that you continue to put what's up here into action. What's in your mind can become actual reality. That's what we did with forming the coalition of artists and art makers in Brooklyn, myself and Osei, who is the executive director for Asasaya. We both, in living in Bed-Stuy, living in the same block, talked about the importance of supporting each other and not depending on the large institutions that tend to get all the money, right? And that where the money tends to leave our immediate communities, right? So I don't need to say names of the larger institutions here, right, in Brooklyn even, right? I don't need to say names, but I will say, in having those conversations, we wanted to find ways to make funding accessible, to support local artists, and to have them know that they have a voice to come and have conversation, and to turn words into action, which is also what Baba said. Oh.
Yes. So we have a couple minutes left, but I'd love to take a question from the audience. Go right ahead. You want to take that one first?
You want to start and then I'll tag you? Okay. Okay. So, first of all, what's your name? Alexandra. Okay, let's give her a round of applause for being courageous to stand and ask that question. And the class, I think I'm familiar with the course you're taking at Spelman. Is that's the requirement for all students? That's right. Yes, I've heard a lot about that course, and I've heard really, really wonderful things about it, and so that's great that you have that opportunity, and that you're also looking at curation, right, and the importance of the archiving and the storytelling aspect of our culture. I have to say that it is quite a challenge. It is not easy, right, when it comes to self-care, especially women's work, right? I would say for us as women, Kathy and I constantly talk about the importance of having to pull away sometimes, being wives, being mothers, being also professional women that work and go in and do a lot and work on many different projects, being art makers, supporting art makers, all of these different ways that we have this work. It can be, and it is, absolutely overwhelming at times, but I know I am learning how to pull away at times and how to just take time for myself, right? As we know, was it Toni Morrison that said, self-love is a revolutionary act? Did I get that right? And that is true. In order to take care of ourselves, we have to make sure that we put that in the schedule as well, because if not, we will keep going, and then before you know it, years later, you're wondering why you feel a certain way, why we run ourselves down. And so you have to put that right in the schedule along with everything else as you do your planning, and make sure you take time to spend with dear friends, take time to journal and write, and take time to go and have whatever self-care is helpful for you to feel like you get a chance to breathe, right, and to appreciate the world around us, right? That's really incredibly important. And so I will pause there, because I'm going to say, Kat and I, we talk often actually about this kind of thing.
All the time. All the time, and we steal our moments. So we hang out when we can, because our ladies together, just having that moment is super important for us, and that's an act of self-care for me. I also, it's interesting, my daughter's also at Spelman. She's in her third year. We'll talk about him as a Sealy. And I also ask her all the time, because there's many things happening. She has so many plans. She's brilliant. She wants to do so many things in the world. Like, okay, what are you doing to make sure that you ground yourself? Like, how are you remembering your practice? And so the practice that we keep is just the meditation, like meditations, prayer, making sure that we are aligned with the divine, and constantly seeing ourselves moving towards our divine selves and our divine right and that light that's within. So because there's so many distracting, again, I'll bring up capitalism, remembering what we're working in and being able to step away. And that's why I also think that this conversation is so important, because it's not only for community to begin to plan, it's for ourselves, right? We need to practice Kilombo as a revolutionary act for ourselves, to step away, to say no, I need a moment. And I'll share also with my organization, I'm with the Launchpad Project, which I love because we also build in, and you attract what you need. So at the LP, joining the team, we built in our own, we have policy. We have policy that is, you must take self-care. Like our comp days, like we're off tomorrow, right? We'll be off tomorrow, we'll be off the next day because we are doing this big production and we need to rest. We have a rest and relaxation fund so that we can make sure that we take care of ourselves. We have to have, even have support for us to travel and go away for ourselves. So we attracted an organization and work and built this into our actual structure of the org. So you can do that as well when you're looking for work, making sure that the companies or whoever you're working with, or if you're building something your own self, that you build that into your value system, and making sure that the organizations are building that into their value system or introducing it. So, because it's so important to continue this work and keep yourself alive and aligned. I also, you brought up just a memory of when I was in college in my third year. I started to do my ancestral research and going through, it seems like forever, all of the slave, of the ships that brought over the enslaved Africans. And I remember one night going through the research, going through the studies, and seeing maybe about 30 ships that loaded up with maybe, let's say, 200 of us, and by the time they got to the shores, there were maybe 10 left that survived the journey. And I'm just going over record after record after record. I got physically ill, like physically ill, and I had to take a break from that work and get with my friends and just really have some really healing conversations and breaking things down as to why this is happening in the world, and just being able to, again, preserve ourselves. And the sun was shining, it was trying to come through, but really this water is so healing. It is so healing to wash away, to acknowledge every single element that we've been gifted with, and just keeping that in the back of our mind. Like the ground that we stand on is just so active, and you all are leaving your imprint, right, here in this space. Someone else is going to come in this space and feel this energy, right? They're going to feel the essence of this conversation just by way of spirit. And so that's why, again, I brought them in, like, close to me. I got to keep these people close because they have the tools, they have the medicine for us to continue this work and not do it and be exhausted. Yes. I started an organization we mentioned earlier, Artists New York, and during COVID, with funding and all the things that were happening, and then I lost 4 or 5 people in my family, I needed to take a break. So I stepped back when my community holds me down. I saw one of the artists I work with yesterday at a festival, and they're like, how are you doing? They always hold me because we've built that in for ourselves. And so, but when we need to take a break, we need to take a break. And it's so beautiful to have permission, give yourself permission to do that.
I'm so glad that you actually said that, because I wanted to touch on the idea of healing and, like you said, self-preservation. Having that sister circle. I'm going to call it a circle because that comes back to the idea of liberatory spaces, right? The circle in so many of our diasporic communities have some form of circle, right? Whether we call it the roda in Brazil with the capoeira, whether we call it the cipher in hip hop or in house dance, whether we call it the bantaba or the geo in African dance, and specifically West African dance, whether we call it the cumbia in Spanish-speaking communities, many nations that have some form of circle dance. The space of the circle and having your sister circle as an example is really, really important because it does help to preserve the self. And so when you have someone that you can share with, and where you can sort of come away with, you know, and steal away to that space, right? That is also a part of the healing or the preserving of our spirit and our well-being, our physical well-being as well. So, you know, I have my sister circle, my wonderful big sister right here, who is just so incredibly important to me in terms of having a sister circle, being a part of a place where you can go, and having a family circle, whatever your circle or your space is, right? Like I just named those different examples. That's it. That's important.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Yeah, we had to. We are going to be moving over to the space, and to the other space. So we're going to end this incredible conversation, because I feel like we just got started, but we could talk for hours. But we are going to ask you all to be engaged in this conversation in the next. In this room. Okay, great. So it's going to be in this room, actually. So you don't have to get up and leave, but we will be unpacking this thought, this concepts around liberation in the Bed-Stuy neighborhood. And so with that, I'm going to pass the mic back over to, wait, before I do that, thank you so much, sis. Thank you for saying yes. Yes, thank you for saying yes to this. I was praying that you will be available, and yeah, for giving all the jewels to the community. We appreciate you. Thank you all so much. Passing you back to you, Isa.
Yeah, thank you both again. So we handed out some cards during the conversation, and what we'd like to ask everyone to do is take a few minutes to just write down your reflections from this conversation. And we had a prompt also near the brunch room that was, how can we live liberation in our lives, whether that's in Bed-Stuy, globally, Greater New York, wherever. It's important to you to live liberation. And so our hope is that you'll write some reflections and find someone in the room that you don't know, and share them with each other. So we'll give you 5 minutes to write some thoughts down, and then we'll prompt you when it's time to meet someone new.
And while you're writing down your prompt answers, we want to just quickly do a great round of applause. Yes, for Dr. Fatou Gittins and Catherine's conversation, but also thank you for our ASL interpreter, Amanda, as well. Thank you. So we're just going to give you some time to write those answers. Maybe we can get a little bit of music to help. Sure. The question was, how do we live liberation in our daily lives? So how do we live liberation in our daily lives? And that that's written in words, maybe that's a drawing. It's your form of interpretation on how you want to live out your understanding and interpretation of living liberation. The Q&A already took place? Yeah. Yeah, so I think that part is mainly covered. I was just curious to make sure, are you still live streaming? Do you still need interpretation services? Are we still live streaming? Yes, we are still live streaming. So how long would the activity be? We're giving it about 5
Hello, hello, everyone. I see that some of you are
Hi,
already
my name is
engaged
Elise
in
Fox,
conversation,
model,
which
mom,
we
and
love. We are going to wrap up and thank our live audience who is joining us from the live stream for joining us. And we encourage you to continue having these conversations, prompts, stay a while. There's more food if anyone got hungry.
And there's to-go boxes.
There's to-go boxes. And we want to thank Amber Charles one more time for ASL interpretation. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and keep chatting.